Do you remember how your grandparents always seemed to make a meal out of nothing? A bit of bread, a scrap of meat, a handful of vegetable, and somehow the whole family sat down to eat a hearty meal. One of these meals needed only 2 simple ingredients, and yet it carried families through the hardest days. Keep watching to find out which one. Starting with the classic hearty cottage pie. Leftover mutton or beef was minced with tired vegetables and topped with mashed potatoes that kept the whole dish hot for hours. Your grandparents always said it felt like a banquet made from scraps, with crispy potato edges, soft layers beneath, and meat that grew tender after long, slow cooking. Nothing was wasted, and 6 people could eat from what looked like very little. Kids loved scraping the top while parents dug into the bottom, and by morning it tasted even better. It wasn't fancy, but it was survival disguised as comfort. The next dish stretched scraps like nothing else: golden sausage bake. This dish was the magician's trick for turning 3 sausages into a tray that looked like a feast. Cold batter poured over hot fat puffed into golden walls of Yorkshire pudding, filling the air with laughter when families saw it balloon. The edges crisped, the middle stayed soft, and the whole dish soaked up grease like a sponge. Eggs, flour, and milk cost next to nothing, yet when combined with a bit of meat, they made a meal that felt generous. Grandma always said this was her way of fooling hungry eyes because no one noticed how little meat was really there. Still, nothing warmed a kitchen like warm Lancashire stew. It told the story of early mornings and endless shifts. Wives prepared it at dawn, dropping the pot at a bakery to cook in cooling oven heat while they worked long days. Cheap lamb scraps, onions and potatoes turned into a layered miracle. Bottom slices soaked in juice, onions melted sweet, meat fell from the bone, and the top crisped golden. Families returned tired, but dinner waited rich and ready. Grandpa used to say it was food you could smell from the street, calling children home after dusk. It was filling, thrifty, and shared across whole neighborhoods. Yet, the next one turned scraps into luxury: steak and kidney pie. This pie was proof that waste could be treasure. Kidneys, packed with protein, iron, and vitamins, were combined with tough beef and baked inside flaky lard pastry. The gravy that bubbled inside was rich enough to make the dish feel grander than it cost. Families cut thick slices, saving leftovers for the next day when the flavor deepened even more. One pie could feed everyone twice, stretching pennies into comfort. Your grandparents often said it was the meal that made them feel richest, even when money was lowest. Next up, nothing carried men underground better than Cornish pasty. This was food built to survive. Thick pastry encased a filling of meat, potatoes, onions, keeping it warm for hours in deep mines. One end was savory, the other sweet, and initials carved on top made sure no miner ate the wrong one. The crust acted like a handle held with coal-blackened hands, then tossed away once the inside was gone. For children at home, pasties were exciting because they felt like a secret parcel waiting to be opened. Grandma said the thick dough was edible Tupperware, protecting the meal through dust, tunnels, and long days. Up next, this one effortlessly packed a farmer's field day, ploughman's lunch. It was as simple as it gets: bread, cheese, pickles, onions, maybe an apple if you were lucky. Farmers carried it into the fields because it needed no cooking, no fuss, and kept well all day. Strong cheddar gave rich flavor, pickled onions added a tangy bite, and thick bread filled stomachs that faced dawn to dusk work. It wasn't fancy, but it gave strength without slowing anyone down. Families laughed that cheese marketers later invented the name, but the meal had been around forever. It was a way of turning odds and ends into fuel for endless labor, but the next meal brought families together like nothing else: Sunday roast. It was never just food, it was the highlight of the week. Meat was rare, so Sunday was the one chance to enjoy it, with potatoes, vegetables, and gravy on the side. But the real treasure wasn't just the roast itself, it was the drippings, saved for the week ahead. Eggs fried in beef fat on Tuesday felt like luxury. Potatoes roasted on Wednesday were perfection, and bones boiled into soup stretched the value even further. One piece of meat fed a family across several days, proving that careful planning turned a single meal into many. Another dish that made leftovers shine was bubble and squeak. This dish always made Mondays brighter. After the Sunday roast, all the leftover vegetables were mashed with potatoes and fried until crisp. Families loved the sound it made in the pan, bubbling and squeaking as edges browned. What was tired yesterday turned golden and exciting, with crispy bits on the outside and creamy potato on the inside. It cost nothing extra, wasted nothing, and somehow tasted better than the original meal. Children laughed at the funny name, while parents smiled because it stretched food just one more day. Yet, no dish that gave workers even more strength was black pudding. This pudding was once a superfood before the word even existed. Made from pig's blood, oats and spices, it carried more iron than spinach and more protein than chicken. For men working 16-hour shifts, it was the kind of fuel their bodies needed. Families stirred the blood constantly to keep it smooth, then cooked it into rich, dark slices that fried up savory and filling. It might sound odd today, but back then it was treasured as a powerhouse of nutrition. Cheap, nourishing, and never wasted, it kept workers standing strong through brutal days. And yet, nothing stretched cheap organs further than faggots and peas. They turned what rich families threw away into something nourishing. Hearts, livers, and lungs mixed with breadcrumbs and wrapped in caul fat became flavorful little bundles. Cheap but packed with vitamins, they were more nourishing than steak. Served hot with mushy peas or cold in sandwiches, they filled stomachs for days. Families made big batches using whatever offcuts they could gather, knowing every bit mattered. Children often didn't realize they were eating organ meat at all. The flavor was too good once seasoned and cooked right. Another meal that gave tired families sweetness at the end of the day was jam roly-poly. This was comfort disguised as survival. Made from suet pastry rolled with jam, it was steamed until soft and sticky, giving workers the sugar and calories they desperately needed after 16-hour shifts. Grandparents recalled how a single slice could fuel chores late into the night, with jam adding quick sweetness and the pastry offering slow energy. Sometimes families used watered-down jam to make it stretch further, but children didn't mind. They loved the treat either way. In some homes, it became a birthday cake when nothing else was possible. Simple, filling, and made from pantry staples, it turned scarcity into joy. Next up, nothing fed crowds faster than fish and chips, also known as the people's fast food. It filled bellies on a budget. Cheap white fish was fried in batter until crisp, while thick-cut potatoes were cooked alongside. Wrapped in old newspaper, the meal stayed hot on the walk home, with vinegar splashed on top to cut the grease. Families said the batter acted like insulation, keeping the fish moist and delicious, while stretching the portions further. Kids loved tearing into the warm paper, hands greasy and happy, while parents smiled knowing the meal hadn't cost much. It was quick, it was portable, and it felt like a treat even in the toughest times. Another classic that comforted families even more was bangers and mash. It carried a name born of hardship, cheap sausages so full of water they sometimes burst in the pan. Still, once paired with creamy mashed potatoes and onion gravy, they felt like a luxury meal. The sausages were stretched with breadcrumbs and spices, but that only made them soak up flavor better. The potatoes made sure no one left the table hungry, while the sweet onion gravy pulled everything together. Grandparents remembered this as the dish that filled children up without emptying purses, one that always left plates clean, a true working-class staple, simple yet beloved. But nothing gave workers strength like Spotted Dick. Now you might laugh at its name today, but back then it was pure energy in pudding form. Dotted with dried currants and steamed until firm, it carried both quick sugars and long-lasting calories. Each serving packed a punch of energy, something vital for labourers burning thousands of calories a day. Families could stretch a single pudding across 2 meals, serving it with custard when they had the means. The currants lasted for months in storage, and suet pastry gave strength that bread alone couldn't. It wasn't just dessert, it was survival disguised as sweetness. The next meal turned scraps into comfort. Welsh rarebit. It looked simple, melted cheese on toast, but it was far more clever than that. By adding mustard and beer to aged cheese, cooks made humble ingredients taste rich and complex. Poured over thick slices of bread and grilled until golden, it filled stomachs without the need for meat. The beer deepened flavor, the mustard cut through fat, and together they transformed cheese into a meal that felt indulgent. Grandparents often said this dish proved how far ingenuity could stretch basics, turning cheap food into something unforgettable. It was warmth, strength, and comfort all in one. And yet, nothing gave poor families flavour on pennies like cream chipped beef on toast. It earned the nickname SOS from soldiers, but at home it was a thrifty way to turn a handful of dried beef into dinner. Thin slices were stirred into a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, then poured over the toast, often stale bread given new life. Salty, creamy, and filling, it fed children quickly and cheaply. Grandparents sometimes rinsed the beef first to remove excess salt, a trick learned when health became a concern. It wasn't fancy, but it stretched a small amount of protein far enough to fill hungry bellies. However, nothing kept families warm on cold nights like pea soup with dumplings. It began with dried peas, onions, and maybe a ham bone if one was lucky. Slowly simmered, the peas softened into a thick, hearty base, while dumplings made from flour, water, and salt puffed up on top. Children counted the dumplings to make sure everyone got a fair share, laughing as they soaked in the flavour of the soup. It was filling, cheap, and comforting, just the thing for winter evenings. In some homes it became tradition, especially among immigrant families who brought the recipe with them. Another meal that eased hard times was onion sandwich. They were the simplest sign of poverty because they needed only 2 ingredients, just bread and a thick slice of onion, maybe a bit of butter if it could be spared. Sometimes children sprinkled sugar on top to soften the bite, calling it a poor man's treat. Coal miners carried them in their lunch tins, the strong smell keeping others from stealing their food. Families said the onion wasn't just flavour, it gave vitamins when fresh vegetables were scarce. Harsh but honest, it reminded people that even the humblest ingredients could keep you going. The next meal captured Depression-era ingenuity like nothing else: water pie. This was exactly what its name promised, a pie made from water when nothing else was at hand. Families poured water, sugar, flour, butter, and a bit of vanilla into a crust, baking it into a custard-like filling. Sweetness was scarce, so sugar rations were saved for these rare desserts, often made for Sunday dinner or birthdays. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave children a taste of something special when times were bleak. Church gatherings sometimes saw them lined up beside fruit pies, with no one daring to say which was which. But nothing carried bitterness in its name like Hoover stew. This stew reflected both hunger and anger at the president blamed for the Depression. A pot of macaroni, canned tomatoes, corn, and chopped hot dogs simmered into a filling, if odd, meal. Soup kitchens and shanty towns made it daily, stretching one hot dog across a dozen bowls. Substitutions were common: government cheese instead of meat, cabbage instead of corn. But the formula was the same: bulk up pasta with whatever scraps were at hand. Families remembered it as a community food, shared when no one had enough alone. The next meal gave stale bread a second life: bread pudding. This meal meant no crust was wasted. Families cubed stale bread, soaked it in milk, eggs, sugar, and cinnamon when they had it, then baked it until golden. Sometimes water replaced milk and flour stretched the eggs, but it still came out warm and comforting. If raisins could be spared, they gave tiny bursts of sweetness. Bakeries sold yesterday's loaves cheap, and thrifty housewives turned them into dessert that tasted like a luxury. Children loved the soft middle, while parents prized the crisp edges. Proof that simple food could feel special. Grandparents remembered it as a dish that turned survival into joy. A small reminder that sweetness could still exist in hard times. Up next, this dish flavoured beans better than anything else: ham hocks and beans. This one showed how thrift could create depth. The rich ate ham steaks, while the poor boiled the bony joints where the leg met the foot. Dried beans soaked overnight and simmered with a hock until smoky flavour filled the pot. After hours of slow cooking, scraps of meat slipped free, tender and full of taste. The beans became creamy, soaking up every bit of broth, and cornbread often sat beside the bowl to capture the last drops. It lasted for days, warming families through winter, and gave proof that no part of an animal should be wasted. Your grandparents remembered its smell filling the kitchen, heavy but comforting, tied to long evenings when money was thin. Up next, nothing brought the hunt home like rabbit stew. It turned the fields into food when pantries ran empty. Rabbits were lean, but with slow cooking and garden vegetables, they became the base of hearty meals. Carrots, onions, and potatoes simmered together until broth grew rich, while dumplings floated on top to stretch the dish further. Families relied on traps or shotguns, knowing rabbits provided protein when beef or pork were rationed. Wartime pamphlets even encouraged raising rabbits at home, reminding children they weren't pets but dinner. The stew carried the flavour of survival, earthy, strong and filling, enough to keep workers going the next day. Grandpa remembered it as the taste of necessity turned into warmth. However, nothing filled sandwiches cheaper than pinto bean sandwiches. These sandwiches proved meat wasn't needed to carry a family. Cold beans left from supper were mashed with chopped onions and a little vinegar, spread between slices of bread baked in big batches to save fuel. A dab of mustard, when available, gave tang that made the filling feel brighter. Lunch pails carried them into mines, mills and schoolyards where children traded bites, but rarely swapped away their beans. They were simple, honest and packed with strength that kept hunger away. Your grandparents said they symbolized determination. No one went without, even if meat was too costly. The next meal turned scraps into sweetness, corn cob jelly. This jelly was sweetness rescued from waste. After kernels were eaten, cobs were boiled to pull out every trace of flavor, then mixed with sugar and pectin into a golden jelly. Spread on biscuits or cornbread, it tasted like honey crossed with flowers, light, surprising, and satisfying. Farm families prized it because it stretched sugar rations further, letting children have something sweet without spending much. Church cookbooks often included it under names like Desperation Jelly, a reminder that ingenuity turned scraps into treasures. Grandma recalled how it made them smile even in lean times. It was proof that nothing was wasted, and even leftovers could feel like a gift. Which of these meals would you still have today? Let us know in the comments below. If you learned something new today, please give the channel a subscribe. See you in the next one.